Gavin boasted a truly magnificent mane, genuinely fantastic, almost comparable to my own, as the President of the United States stood positioned behind a lectern at the National Governors Association winter gathering in Washington, D.C., on a Monday afternoon in February of 2026, addressing a quintessential assembly of 50 state governors regarding the dual pillars of economic expansion and border security, when he happened to visually locate the single governor in America who had dedicated the entirety of the Tess's preceding week to attempting to provoke him via social media channels, and decided, in that specific manner, that only Donald Trump could decide matters. Instantaneously, instinctively, and with the absolute, unwavering certainty that what was about to transpire would undoubtedly be the most entertaining occurrence in the political sphere all year, to completely shift the topic of conversation. Gavin Newsom was, naturally, seated in the very front row because Gavin Newsom invariably sat in the front row, possessing the posture of a man who had been photographed 10,000 times and understood with geometric precision exactly which angle rendered his jawline the most gubernatorial, clad in a navy suit with an open collar and devoid of a tie, because Gavin Newsom eschewed ties in the same manner that California eschewed rules. And the hair, that hair which had launched 1,000 internet memes, the hair that remained immovable in wind or rain or amid political crises, the hair that appeared to have been engineered by the very same design team responsible for the exterior aerodynamics of a Tesla. He was wearing a smirk, a facial expression he had maintained since Trump began his address. And this smirk was an integral component of the strategy, a strategy that Newsom's communications team had been executing with escalating aggression for the past year, which was to provoke Trump, elicit an attack, fundraise off the subsequent conflict, and repeat the cycle. It had functioned with brilliance, for in the past week alone, Newsom had posted a photograph of himself holding branded Trump knee pads at the World Economic Forum in Davos. He had drawn a comparison between Trump and a T-Rex during a panel discussion, and his press office had tweeted that Trump was incapable of ceasing his thoughts about the California governor, to which the White House had responded by labeling him a third-rate governor named Newscum. The social media warfare had been escalating for months, and both parties were claiming victory. With Trump winning over his base and Newsom winning over the Democratic primary electorate that would, in 2 years' time, select a nominee to replace him, as the strategy required only one element, which was Trump's attention, and Newsom had successfully acquired it. However, what Newsom failed to comprehend, what his communications team had not successfully modeled, and what his pollsters had not gamed out, was the profound difference between possessing Trump's attention on a digital platform versus possessing Trump's attention within a physical room. On social media, Newsom retained the ability to edit. He could draft and redraft. He could workshop the knee pads joke with 3 distinct staffers before posting it, and he could be humorous on his own terms and at his own pace, with a delete button safely in his pocket, but in a room with Trump, in Trump's territory, at Trump's event, with Trump behind the podium and the cameras rolling, there existed no edit button, there was no draft, there was only Trump, and there was you, and the entire nation was about to discover who possessed the superior speed. "Gavin, I see you down there," Trump articulated, and his voice carried that warm, conversational quality that his staff recognized as the terrifying precursor to something devastating, noting that he saw the smirk and stating that it was acceptable that he should smirk, as he had enjoyed a great week on social media with the knee pads and the dinosaur references, calling it very creative and very Instagram, suggesting that his social media manager deserved a salary increase, which in California he would desperately need because a 1-bedroom apartment in San Francisco cost $4,000 a month. There was scattered laughter as governors shifted in their seats, the Republican governors leaning forward in anticipation, while the Democratic governors glanced tentatively at Newsom. But Trump continued, suggesting that since he was present, and since he had been speaking about him all week, posting about him, mocking him, and performing his little routines, perhaps he should approach the stage right now, come to the microphone, and engage in a conversation, governor to president, in front of all his colleagues, asking him what he said to that proposition. The room descended into silence, containing 50 governors, 100 aides, and 30 cameras, for this was definitively not on the schedule. Yet Newsom did not hesitate. He stood and buttoned his jacket in a gesture so reflexive it bordered on the unconscious, the muscle memory of a man who had been standing up in front of cameras since he was 36 years old, and he walked toward the podium with the easy, unhurried stride of an individual who desired the cameras to capture every single step. He positioned himself at the second microphone, merely 3 feet away from Trump, and smiled that specific smile that had won him every election he had ever entered, stating, "Mr. President, thank you for the invitation," and adding that since he seemed so interested in California, he should allow him to explain what was actually occurring in his state. "Actually, Gavin," Trump interjected, "I know what is happening in California, and that is precisely the problem, as does everybody else. To fully comprehend what transpired next, to understand why a 25-minute exchange between a president and a governor at what was ostensibly a routine intergovernmental meeting transformed into the most watched political confrontation of 2026, surpassing even the famous Rose Garden dismantling of Adam Schiff 4 months prior, one must understand 2 fundamental things about both men. The first is that they are in many significant ways remarkably similar, both being tall, physically commanding, camera-ready men who constructed their careers on presence as much as policy, both emerging from wealth, with Trump hailing from Fred, Trump's Queen's real estate empire, and Newsom from a family whose closest friend happened to be Gordon Getty, heir to the Getty oil fortune, both owning businesses that trade heavily on their personal brands, the Trump Organization with its towers, and the Plumpjack Group with its wineries, both having married glamorous women who became public figures in their own right, and both understanding at a cellular level that in American politics, how one appears on camera matters just as much as what one articulates. The second factor is that they are in one critical way fundamentally different, for Trump had managed something that the entire country could visibly see: an economy with GDP growth, job numbers, and stock market records, meaning that whether one loved him or hated him, the numbers were displayed on a screen that everyone could read. Whereas Newsom had managed something that the entire country could also see, and what they saw were tent cities sprawling on the sidewalks of Los Angeles, wildfire smoke obscuring the Pacific Coast Highway, and a bullet train that had been under construction for 18 years, yet still could not transport a single passenger from one city to another. Trump possessed results, while Newsom possessed branding, and at the NGA meeting in February 2026, with 50 governors watching and 30 cameras rolling, the branding was about to collide with the results. "Gavin," Trump said, and his tone shifted to become warmer, almost avuncular, the tone of a man about to say something terrible, while sounding as though he were doing you a favor, stating that he liked him, that he really did, recalling that they used to get along great, asking if he remembered when he was president the first time and the fires hit Paradise in 2018, how he came out to California and they met on the tarmac and walked through the wreckage together, calling it a good day, a sad day but a good day where they worked together and were a team, before pausing and adding, "And then you went to the French Laundry." The laugh that rippled through the room was not loud. It was the quiet, knowing, Involuntary laughter of 50 people who all knew exactly what the French Laundry signified and had been waiting to see how long it would take Trump to arrive at that topic. November 6th, 2020. The French Laundry, one of the most expensive restaurants in the state of California, which in a state replete with expensive restaurants, is saying something substantial, costing $350 a plate, and Gavin went there for a birthday party for a lobbyist. With no mask, engaging in indoor dining with a large group, sitting shoulder to shoulder, laughing, having a wonderful time, and while he was enjoying his $350 dinner with his lobbyist friend, Trump asked if they knew what 40 million Californians were doing, noting they were sitting at home in their apartments and in their houses alone because Gavin had told them they could not go out. He told them they could not go to restaurants because the restaurants were closed. He told them they could not go to church because the churches were closed. He told them they could not visit their parents in the hospital because the hospitals were closed to visitors. He told teachers they could not go to school. He told children they could not go to school. He told grandparents they could not hug their grandchildren. And yet, he went to the French Laundry. Trump turned to Newsom, who was standing 3 feet away with the composed expression of a man who had answered this question 100 times and had a response ready, and added that he almost forgot another part, his own company, Plumpjack, noting it was a terrible name, and asking who names a company Plumpjack, as it sounds like a character in a nursery rhyme, but stating that Plumpjack owns restaurants and wineries, and those restaurants received almost $3 million in PPP loans, government money, taxpayer money, emphasizing that the governor's own restaurants received $3 million from the program he created to save businesses, while other restaurants, the restaurants that his voters owned, closed forever and never opened again, declaring that such a thing is not governance. Gavin, that is a protection racket. Newsom leaned into his microphone, his voice measured and practiced, the voice of a man who had rehearsed this answer with his communications director on the flight from Sacramento, stating, "Mr. President, I have addressed the French Laundry many times. I apologized. I said it was a mistake. It was a mistake. And frankly, if we want to talk about COVID response, California had one of the lowest per capita death rates of any large state in the country. You apologized. Great," Trump said, cutting him off with the cheerful brutality of a man who had been waiting for exactly this response, calling it wonderful and very noble, but posing a question for Gavin to think about, asking if the restaurants that closed, the small ones, the family ones, the ones owned by immigrants who put everything they had into a little taco shop or a little Italian place, if they could get an apology, if they could accept an apology, stating that they could not because they are gone, the business is closed, the dream is dead, the savings are spent. Can the kids who missed a year of school get an apology? The kids who fell behind? The kids who had mental health crises because they were locked in their houses for 12 months? Can they accept an apology? Can the grandmother who died alone in a hospital room with no family, no hand to hold, no one to say goodbye, because your rules said her family couldn't visit? Can she get an apology? Or is the apology just for you? Just Gavin gets to apologize and move on? Gavin gets to say, "I made a mistake," and everybody is supposed to forget, because that is not how it works. That is not how it works for the people who lost their businesses and their parents and their children's educations while you were eating a $350 dinner, noting that they don't get a French Laundry, they get a closed sign on their door and a bill they can't pay. The room was silent. Not the silence of agreement, but the silence of governors, Republican and Democrat alike, who knew that every word Trump had just said was factually accurate and emotionally devastating, and that there was no soundbite in the world that could effectively counter it. But let us move on, Trump said. And his voice shifted again. Lighter, almost playful, executing the gear change that kept audiences off balance and cameras rolling, proposing to talk about character because Gavin is running for president, stating that everybody knows it. He knows it, I know it, the hair knows it. Look at that hair. It is already running. The hair is already in Iowa. And when you run for president, people look at your character. They want to know who you are. Not just what policies you support, but who you are as a person. And I think the people of America deserve to know something about Governor Newsom's character. He turned to Newsom, and while the playfulness was still there, underneath it was something else. The flat, transactional directness of a man who had been negotiating deals for half a century and knew exactly when to show his cards. In 2005, Gavin was the mayor of San Francisco. Very young, very handsome, very popular. And he had an aide named Alex Turk. Alex was his campaign manager, his right-hand man, the guy who got him elected. Alex was also his friend, his close friend. They socialized together, their families were close, and Gavin had an affair with Alex's wife. A murmur went through the room, not of surprise, as the affair was public knowledge and nearly 2 decades old, but hearing it said out loud, 3 feet from Newsom's face, by the President of the United States, was distinctly different from reading about it on a Wikipedia page. Ruby Rippy Turk. She was Gavin's appointment secretary, his employee, and she was his best friend's wife. And Gavin, the future governor, the future presidential candidate, the guy who stands up here with the beautiful hair and talks about moral leadership, slept with her, his employee, his best friend's wife. Alex found out when Ruby told him in rehab she was being treated for alcoholism, and part of the treatment was telling the truth. So she told him, and Alex, this good man, this loyal friend, confronted Gavin and resigned, because that is what a man with character does. He walks away from betrayal. And do you know what Gavin did? He blamed it on alcohol. He said he was drinking too much. Very sad story. Very sympathetic. He said he would stop drinking. He said he was going to get help. And then in 2018, 13 years later, he admitted he never went to rehab. Never. He told the Sacramento Bee, "There is no rehab. I just stopped." And then he started drinking again. He told the San Francisco Chronicle he enjoys a little wine again. Trump paused, then delivered the line he had been building toward, stating that he blamed his affair on alcohol. He didn't go to rehab. He started drinking again. And he owns a winery, Plump Jack Winery. He makes wine. That is like blaming a car crash on driving, and then opening a dealership. That is like blaming a fire on matches, and then selling matches. Laughter, genuine, rolling. Bipartisan laughter filled the room. The kind of laughter that happens when a joke is both funny and true. And the person it is about is standing 3 feet away. And I hate to bring this up, but I cannot resist. His ex-wife, Kimberly, beautiful Kimberly Guilfoyle, Gavin's first wife. You know where she is now. She is with my son, Don Jr. She is in the Trump family. She is going to be ambassador to Greece. Beautiful country Greece. Beautiful posting. And she got there by leaving Gavin Newsom and joining the Trumps. He turned to the room with the timing of a man who had been doing stand-up comedy in front of 20,000 people at a time for a decade, stating that even his wife switched teams. The laughter was louder this time. A Republican governor in the second row covered his face. A Democratic governor bit her lip, while Newsom stood still, his smile fixed, his eyes unreadable. But enough about the personal stuff, Trump said, though his tone suggested he could have done the personal stuff for another hour and enjoyed every second. Actually, one more thing, because I keep hearing Gavin described as a self-made man, A man of the people fighting for the little guy. And I think the other governors in this room, some of whom actually are self-made, deserve to know the truth. Gavin's godfather, his godfather is Gordon Getty. Gordon Getty as in the Getty oil fortune, as in one of the richest families in the history of California. The Getty family bankrolled Gavin's entire career, $500,000 in donations, maybe more, and his wine company, Plumpjack. Do you know where the name comes from? It is the name of an opera that Gordon Getty wrote. He named his business after his billionaire godfather's opera. That is not a self-made man. That is a trust fund baby who learned to use hair gel. And Plumpjack, this wine company, these restaurants. When Gavin became governor, he was supposed to put everything in a blind trust to avoid conflicts of interest. Very standard, very appropriate, and he did put it in a trust. But do you know who runs the trust? His wife, and the beneficiaries are his children. That is not a blind trust. That is a family trust with a blindfold on it. You cannot have a blind trust run by your wife for your children and call it blind. I know about blind trusts, by the way. I know about conflicts of interest. People have been accusing me of conflicts of interest for 10 years, but at least I was honest about it. I said I have a big business. It is complicated. Here is what I am doing. Whereas Gavin pretends it is all in a blind trust while his wife is managing his winery, that is not transparency. That is a magic trick. Trump paused, scanned the room the way he always scanned a room, not looking for approval, but for the energy, for the rhythm, for the moment when entertainment should become substance. But let us talk about what really matters, he said, and his voice changed. The comedy was over. Let us talk about the people of California, because the people of California deserve a lot better than what they have been getting. Homelessness, the big one, the one that Gavin promised to fix when he ran in 2018, claiming, "I'll solve homelessness." Those were basically his words. And California, the great state of California, the Golden State, gave him everything, every tool, every dollar, every vote. They gave him a Democratic supermajority in the legislature. They gave him no Republican opposition. They gave him $24 billion. He let the number hang in the air. $24 billion on homelessness over 6 years, noting that is more than most countries spend on their entire military. And asking if they knew what happened, stating the homeless population went up, not down, up by 31%. 31% more homeless people after spending $24 billion. In the rest of the country, the rest of America, the parts that Gavin doesn't govern, homelessness went down by 10%. The rest of America spent less and got better results. Gavin spent $24 billion and got worse results. The state auditor, California's own auditor, not mine, not a Republican, California's own watchdog, said the administration could not determine the effectiveness of the spending, couldn't determine it, couldn't find it. $24 billion. And they don't know where it went or what it did. And in 2023, last year, Gavin went on Sean Hannity's show, and Hannity asked him about homelessness. And you know what Gavin said? He said, and this is a direct quote, "We have not made progress." He said it. The governor of California admitted on national television that after $24 billion, they have not made progress. Trump turned to Newsom, stating, "Gavin, I am a businessman. If I gave a contractor $24 billion and the building got smaller, I would fire the contractor. If I hired a chef and the food got worse, I would close the restaurant. You spent $24 billion and the problem got worse. In any other industry, you would be fired. But in California, you get to run for president. And I will tell you something else, because this is the part that really tells the story. Because of how Gavin runs California, the taxes, The regulations, the cost of living, the crime, the homeless encampments outside every office building. People are leaving, voting with their feet. Between 2020 and 2023, California lost over 1 million residents net. More people leaving than coming. For the first time in the state's history, California lost a congressional seat after the census. Lost a seat, the state that used to gain seats every decade because everyone in America wanted to move there lost one. And where are they going? They are going to Texas. They are going to Florida, Arizona, Nevada, Tennessee, Idaho, Republican states. The people who lived under Gavin Newsom's policies looked around, packed their bags, and moved to states run by Republican governors. That is not a poll. That is not a focus group. That is millions of people answering the question, is California working with a U-Haul? Tech companies too. Oracle left for Texas. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise left for Texas. Tesla. Elon moved the whole company to Austin. Great guy Elon, by the way. Very smart. He looked at California's taxes and regulations and said, no thank you, and moved to a state where you can actually build things. Charles Schwab gone to Texas. And these aren't just companies. These are jobs. These are tax revenues. These are the people who fund the programs that Gavin takes credit for, and he wants to run the country. The man whose state is losing people, losing companies, losing a congressional seat, he wants to take the formula that is shrinking California and apply it to all 50 states. That is like a restaurant that is losing customers saying, let me cater the whole building. We have tasted the food, Gavin. We are going to Texas. Newsom responded, and for the first time in the confrontation, his voice had an edge to it. The edge of a man whose rehearsed calm was beginning to crack, stating, Mr. President, homelessness is a national crisis that requires federal partnership, not federal blame. Half the people on the streets of California come from other states, and while California is investing in solutions, your administration has cut federal housing programs. They come from other states. He is blaming other states. That is his move. That is always his move. It is not my fault. It is the other states. It is the federal government. It is the weather. It is the housing market. $24 billion. Gavin. $24 billion. At some point, it is not other people's fault. At some point, it is the guy in charge. And the guy in charge for 7 years has been you. Trump pivoted without pause. The conversational equivalent of a boxer slipping a jab and throwing a counter, saying, and the train, oh, the train, this is my absolute favorite. California voted for a bullet train in 2008. 2008. That is 18 years ago. 18 years. You know what I built in 18 years? I built most of Manhattan. I built towers. I built hotels. I built cities. California has built. And I checked this because I wanted to make sure 0 miles of operating high-speed rail, not 1 mile, not 1 inch. The original estimate was $33 billion to connect San Francisco and Los Angeles. The current estimate, and it goes up every time they estimate it, is over $100 billion for a train. And here is the best part, the section they are actually building right now. The one they are celebrating, the one Gavin cuts ribbons for, goes from Merced to Bakersfield. Merced to Bakersfield. Nobody in the history of transportation has ever needed to get from Merced to Bakersfield at 200 miles an hour. Nobody is sitting in Merced saying, if only I could get to Bakersfield faster. That is not a bullet train. That is a money train. It picks up tax dollars in Sacramento and delivers them to consultants in Los Angeles. That is the only route it runs. Newsom cut in. Sharper now, the rehearsed calm giving way to something more authentic, more combative. The Newsom that his supporters loved and his opponents underestimated, saying, "Mr. President, since we are talking about construction projects, let us talk about your wall, the border wall that Mexico was going to pay for. How much of that got built? How much did Mexico pay? Because I seem to recall a lot of promises and not a lot of wall." The room stirred. It was Newsom's best punch of the afternoon. A counterattack that used Trump's own record against him. The same technique Trump had been using for 25 minutes, and for a moment the dynamic shifted. Newsom was doing what his team had trained him to do. Fight back. Match energy. Give the cameras something to play. Trump didn't flinch. He didn't pause. He smiled the way a boxer smiles when his opponent finally throws a punch worth respecting, stating, 452 miles of wall, Gavin, 452, and I built them against lawsuits from your state, against obstruction from Democrats in Congress, against every judge in the Ninth Circuit trying to block me. And the sections I built, illegal crossings dropped 90% in those sectors. 90. You want to compare construction records? I built 452 miles of wall in 4 years against the entire Democratic establishment. You have built 0 miles of train in 18 years, with a supermajority in your own legislature. Nobody was blocking you, Gavin. Nobody. You had every vote, you had every dollar, and you built nothing. Newsom tried again, saying, and the national debt? You added $8 trillion. I added it during COVID, during a pandemic to save 40 million jobs, and the economy came back stronger than ever. Record stock market, record low unemployment. What did you add $24 billion for? For more homeless people. I spent $8 trillion and saved the economy. You spent $24 billion and got more tents. I will take my return on investment over yours any day of the week. The exchange was illuminating not because Newsom lost it, but because of how he lost it. His counterpunches were legitimate. The border wall had fallen short of its promises. The national debt had ballooned. These were real vulnerabilities, and a more experienced counterpuncher. Someone who had spent decades in face-to-face verbal combat rather than in edited social media exchanges might have landed them. But Trump had been in this kind of fight for 40 years. In boardrooms with hostile investors, on construction sites with angry contractors, in courtrooms with aggressive attorneys, on debate stages with 17 Republican opponents and then 2 Democratic ones, the speed at which he could turn a counterpunch into a counter-counterpunch. Wall becomes wall via train. Debt becomes COVID versus homelessness. Was not something you could learn from watching clips on YouTube. It was muscle memory built over decades. Newsom's team had studied Trump's confrontations and concluded that the key was to fight back. But what they hadn't understood was that fighting back against Trump was like fighting back against the ocean. You could swing all you wanted. The water just moved around your fist and came at you from a direction you hadn't anticipated. And the fires, Trump said. And his voice dropped not to comedy but to something raw. The fires in January, Palisades, Altadena, 29 people dead, 12,000 homes destroyed, beautiful homes, families, memories gone, and the fire hydrants were dry. The reservoirs were empty. They hadn't filled them. The water wasn't there in a state that knows, that has always known, that wildfire season is coming. Every single year the reservoirs were empty and the hydrants were dry. And Gavin's fire chief, the chief of the LA Fire Department, was on vacation during fire season. On vacation. And Gavin, this is documented. This isn't me. This is an investigation by NPR, by CAP Radio. Gavin's administration overstated the acreage they treated for fire prevention by 690%. They said they had cleared 90,000 acres. Actual number 11,000. They lied by 690%. That is not a rounding error. That is not an accounting mistake. That is a lie. And 29 people died. The room was silent again. This was different from the French Laundry, or the affair, or the bullet train. This was death. And Trump, for all his comedy, for all his mockery, knew when to stop performing and start prosecuting. And after the fires, remember this, Gavin came to the airport when I flew to LA. He met me on the tarmac. He shook my hand. He looked into the camera and said, "You were there for us during COVID. I don't forget that. And I have all the expectations we will be able to work together. Beautiful, very classy, very respectful." And I said, "We are going to get it done." 5 months later, he sued me for sending the National Guard to help with immigration enforcement. He sued me for protecting his state. He shook my hand in January and sued me in June. That is, Gavin Newsom. Nice smile to your face. Lawsuit in his back pocket. Newsom had been standing through all of it. The French Laundry, the affair, the homelessness numbers, the bullet train, the wildfires. He had absorbed it the way he absorbed everything, with the practiced composure of a man who believed that looking unruffled was the same as being unruffled. Now, he leaned into the microphone for the statement he had been preparing. The statement his team had anticipated would be his defining moment. The clip that would play on MSNBC for a week, the soundbite that would launch a presidential campaign. "Mr. President," he said, and his voice was steady, polished. The voice of a man who had stood in front of cameras since he was the youngest mayor in San Francisco's history. California is the 5th largest economy in the world. We lead the nation in innovation, in clean energy, in technology. In the creative industries, we generate more GDP than most countries. We are where the future is invented. And the people of California, 40 million strong, don't need lectures from a president who has spent more time attacking our state than helping it. It was a good line. It was on paper a powerful line. It had the cadence and the confidence and the camera readiness that had made Gavin Newsom the frontrunner for the 2028 Democratic nomination. It was the kind of line that tested well in focus groups and played well on progressive podcasts and looked impressive on a teleprompter. Trump waited until Newsom finished. Then he smiled. Not the predatory smile he had given Schiff in the Rose Garden, but something more casual, almost pitying. The smile of a man who had just watched someone play their best card and found it wanting. 5th largest economy, Trump repeated. Innovation, clean energy, technology. Very nice. Very impressive on paper. But Gavin, since we are comparing, you also lead the nation in homelessness. You lead in people leaving your state. You lead in unaffordable housing. You lead in tent cities on public sidewalks. You lead in businesses relocating to Texas and Florida and Tennessee. You lead in needles on sidewalks and feces on streets and parents who are afraid to walk their children to school. You are the 5th largest economy in the world, and your people can't afford to live there. You lead in technology, and your fire hydrants don't have water. You lead in innovation, and your bullet train can't go from San Francisco to Los Angeles. Gavin? You have got the hair. You have got the smile. You have got the Instagram. You are very California. But here is the thing about California. And I mean this. I really mean this. Hair doesn't run a state. Charisma doesn't house the homeless. Social media posts don't put out wildfires. And knee pads jokes don't make you president. You know what makes you president. Results. I had results, economy, jobs, no new wars, record stock market. That is why I am standing here. That is why I am the President of the United States, and you are the governor of a state that people are leaving. What are your results? $100 billion train that doesn't move? $24 billion on homelessness that got worse? Wildfires that burned because your reservoirs were empty? A recall election that got 38% of your state to vote against you? And a dinner at the French Laundry that the people of California will never, never forget. He turned to the other 49 governors, asking if any of them wanted to trade states with Gavin. Anyone. Governor Abbott, Governor DeSantis, Governor Whitmer, asking if anyone wanted to trade. Silence. Nobody raised a hand. Nobody laughed. The question was rhetorical, but it didn't need to be. The answer was on every face in the room. Trump turned back to Newsom, stating, "You want to be president, Gavin. I understand. You have got the look. You have got the ambition. You have got the hair. And in politics, hair matters. Believe me, I know. But before you try to run America, fix California, fix the homeless crisis, finish the train, fill the reservoirs, and maybe, just maybe, stop sleeping with your best friend's wife and eating at the French Laundry while your state is locked down." He leaned back from the podium. "Go home, Governor. Your state needs you. Although based on the results, maybe they would be better off without you." The confrontation lasted 25 minutes, and in those 25 minutes, every data point that the Republican National Committee had been compiling on Gavin Newsom for 3 years was delivered not in an opposition research document, but in the voice of a man who had mastered the art of making numbers feel personal and statistics feel like insults. 24 billion was a statistic. 24 billion and more homeless was a weapon. Newsom walked back to his seat. He did not leave the room. He did not turn red. He did not stumble. He sat down, crossed his legs, and within 45 minutes posted on X that the President of the United States just spent 25 minutes attacking California's governor instead of solving problems for the American people. We are in his head, rent-free. The post received 2 million likes. This was the Newsom play. It was always the Newsom play. Get attacked by Trump. Turn the attack into content. Turn the content into fundraising. Turn the fundraising into a presidential campaign. It was clever. It was strategic. And it worked. At least within the ecosystem of Democratic donors and progressive media that constituted Newsom's political universe. The clip of the full confrontation received 85 million views in 72 hours. The reactions split, as they always split along the fault lines of American political opinion. Liberal media praised Newsom's composure. "He stood his ground," wrote a columnist for the Los Angeles Times. "He didn't flinch." MSNBC ran the fifth-largest economy line on a loop and invited 3 guests to discuss why Newsom had won the exchange, while conservative media ran the homelessness numbers, the bullet train numbers, the wildfire numbers, and the French Laundry clip on a loop, and invited 3 guests to discuss why Newsom had been destroyed. Fox News played the Guilfoyle line. Even his wife switched teams 14 times before midnight. But the neutral analysis, the analysis that would matter in a 2028 general election, if not in a Democratic primary, noticed something that both sides were reluctant to acknowledge. Newsom had no answer for the numbers. He had answered the French Laundry with, "I apologized." He had answered the affair with silence. He had answered the homelessness crisis by blaming other states and the federal government. He had answered the wildfires with nothing at all. And he had answered the bullet train with nothing at all. His closing statement: fifth largest economy, innovation, clean energy, technology, was branding. It was a slogan. It was the verbal equivalent of a campaign poster, and Trump had countered it with data points that could be verified by anyone with a search engine. The deeper damage was not to Newsom's dignity. Newsom's dignity was intact. He had smiled. He had composed himself. He had posted the rent-free tweet. He had done everything right in the playbook of a man who understood that being attacked by Trump was a feature, not a bug, of a Democratic primary campaign. The damage was to his credibility, because in 2028, if Gavin Newsom stood on a debate stage in Des Moines or Manchester or Charleston, the person across from him would not be Donald Trump. It would be Gretchen Whitmer, or Josh Shapiro, or J.B. Pritzker, and one of them, probably all of them, would look at Gavin Newsom and say the words that Trump had placed in the political atmosphere like a virus that could not be unbreathed. Governor Newsom, you spent $24 billion on homelessness, and the problem got worse. Your bullet train has been under construction for 18 years and doesn't carry a single passenger. Your state had wildfires that killed 29 people because the reservoirs were empty. How is your plan for America different from your plan for California? And Gavin Newsom would have to answer. Not with fifth largest economy, not with innovation, not with rent-free, with an answer, a real answer, an answer that explained how a man who spent $24 billion and got worse results was qualified to spend $4 trillion. The irony was that Newsom knew this. He was not a stupid man. He was, by most accounts, a genuinely intelligent, policy-literate, ambitious politician who understood the mechanics of government at a level that many of his peers did not. He could speak about housing policy and water management and clean energy with a fluency that would impress any policy wonk in Washington. He had real accomplishments. California's clean energy records were real, its tech sector was real, its cultural influence was real. The problem was not that Newsom was incompetent. The problem was that California's failures were more visible than California's successes. A tent city on a sidewalk was more visible than a solar panel on a roof. An empty reservoir was more visible than a clean air report. A $100 billion train that didn't run was more visible than a $100 billion tech economy that did. And Donald Trump understood visibility better than any politician alive. There was another dimension to the damage that wouldn't become apparent for months. Newsom's 2025 strategy had been built around one core idea: provocation. Attack Trump on social media, get attacked back, use the attacks to position himself as the Democratic Party's most visible fighter. The knee pads stunt at Davos, the T-Rex comparison, the rent-free tweets, the partisan redistricting gambit, which Newsom had explicitly framed as a response to Republican redistricting in Texas, a move that generated national headlines and positioned him as a fighter willing to break norms in the name of fighting back. It was all designed to create one image: Gavin Newsom, the man who stands up to Donald Trump. The NGA confrontation didn't destroy that image. It complicated it, because standing up to Trump was only valuable if you looked good doing it, and looking good didn't mean looking composed or dignified or unflappable. Schiff had looked all of those things in the Rose Garden, and it hadn't mattered. Looking good meant having an answer, having a comeback that landed, having a data point that could match Trump's data points. And Newsom, for all his preparation, for all his social media savvy, had not been able to match 24 billion and more homeless with anything that hit as hard. In the weeks after the NGA, the conversation in Democratic circles shifted subtly but perceptibly. The question was no longer, can Newsom stand up to Trump? The NGA had answered that, in the affirmative. Newsom had stood there, taken the hits, smiled, and posted. The question became, can Newsom answer for California? And that question was harder because the answer required not a social media strategy, but a policy record. And Newsom's policy record, stripped of the branding and the hair and the Instagram, looked like this: 24 billion on homelessness, more homeless, 18 years on a bullet train, 0 miles, wildfires that burned because of mismanagement, a population exodus, a recall that got 38% of his own state to vote against him. A Whitmer advisor, speaking off the record to a reporter, said it plainly, stating the problem is not that Trump attacked him, the problem is that California attacked him. Trump just read the stats. Trump had not waited for Newsom to leave the room. He had continued his speech to the governors regarding border security and economic growth, the things he had planned to talk about before he spotted the hair in the front row. But near the end, after discussing a trade agreement and a military appropriation, he paused, looked out over the room, and he said something that sounded for once like it might have been sincere. I like Gavin, I really do. He has got the hair. He has got the smile. He has got the whole package. He is very California. And I love California. I really do. I made movies there. I had shows there. I have a golf course there. Beautiful state. The most beautiful state in America. And I have been to all of them. But here is the thing about California. It used to be the greatest state in America, maybe the greatest place in the world, the Golden State. People dreamed about moving to California. Movies, music, beaches, technology. The American dream was the California dream. If you wanted to make it in America, you went to California. That is where you went. That is where the magic was. And now people are leaving. Tech companies are leaving. Families are leaving. They are going to Texas. They are going to Florida. They are going to Tennessee, North Carolina, Idaho. They are going to places where they can afford a house, and their kids don't step over needles on the way to school. That is not my fault. That is not the Republican Party's fault. That is what happened to California under one-party rule. Under Gavin Newsom's leadership, under the leadership of beautiful hair and beautiful speeches and beautiful social media posts that don't add up to a single solved problem. And now he wants to do for America what he did for California. He shook his head slowly, not for comedy, but with something that looked from certain angles like genuine sadness, stating, I just spent 4 years building this country back. The economy, the borders, the standing in the world. I built it back, and I am not going to let anybody, no matter how good their hair is, tear it down. He walked away from the podium. Gavin Newsom sat in his chair for 20 minutes after the speech ended, talking to aides, taking calls, projecting the unflappable composure that was his brand and his armor. He looked to the cameras like a man who had been through a fire and come out unsinged. He looked like a man who was already turning the experience into political gold. He looked in every way that a camera could capture like a man who had won. But in the weeks that followed, something changed. Not in Newsom's strategy. He continued the social media war, continued the snarky posts, continued building the 2028 operation. The something that changed was the conversation around him. And the conversation had a number attached to it. 24 billion. This was the truth that the confrontation had exposed. The truth that Newsom's social media operation could not meme away. That his fundraising could not buy back. That his hair and his smile and his composure could not obscure. California was his record, and his record was indefensible. Not entirely. The fifth largest economy was real. The clean energy leadership was real. The technology sector was real, but the failures were also real. And they were the kind of failures, visible, measurable, emotionally resonant, that a political opponent could fit on a bumper sticker. 24 billion and more homeless, 18 years and 0 miles, empty reservoirs, 29 dead, French Laundry, $350 a plate. In the end, the confrontation between Trump and Newsom was not a debate. It was an audition. And both men were auditioning for different audiences. Newsom was auditioning for the Democratic primary. Look at me standing up to Trump, taking the punches, smiling through it. Turning the attack into content. Trump was auditioning for the general election. Look at what he did to California. Look at the numbers, look at the results, and ask yourself if you want that for America. The primary audience gave Newsom a standing ovation. The general election audience gave him a number, 24 billion. And in 2028, if Gavin Newsom stands on a debate stage trying to become President of the United States, that number will be standing right beside him. Not because Trump put it there, but because California did.